know what cheese curds, motorcycles, and surf rods have in common? Turns out the best of all come from Wisconsin.
That's right. We're talking the 77-year-old, family-owned American company, St. Croix Rod, where the surf is no part-time business. Offering 41 models across 5 distinct surf series, St. Croix has been designing and handcrafting high-performance, tech-forward surf rods for decades.
Simply put, St. Croix combines the best technology and components with the lengths, powers, and actions demanded by discerning anglers up and down the Striper Coast. All this to say that St. Croix is the premier choice for anglers who demand the best rods on earth. Check out the full lineup at stcroixrods.com.
Beginning in the 1970s as a mail-order catalog, the Surfcaster has long been known as the source for hard-to-find surf fishing gear, and I've been personally shopping with them since the 1980s. They offer honest advice and the best recommendations regardless of your experience level, and will tailor their suggestions to what you actually need.
As you would expect from a business that's been serving the surfcasting community for 50 years, their prices are competitive and delivery is always quick and secure. They want you to have the best possible experience in the surf and have the knowledge and inventory to put the right gear in your hands to make that happen. So check out the Surfcaster at www.thesurfcaster.com, and if you're in the area, stop into their brand new brick and mortar store in Shelton, Connecticut.
Welcome back to another episode of the Surfcast Podcast. Thanks for tuning in again this week, and this should be the last week that you're stuck with just one host. That would be me, Toby Lapinski, as my co-host. Jerry Audet is still feeling just a tad under the weather. He's doing fine, no worries there. I've been getting out fishing a little bit, fortunately, but he just wasn't able to do the podcast quite yet. But all hopes and plans are that he will be back next week, which is actually quite the interesting week for me personally, as when you're watching next week's episode, I will be down in beautiful, sunny Orlando, Florida, because there's no better time of the year to be in Florida than in the middle of July. But anyway, I will be down there for ICAST, so I'm certainly not complaining. It's always a great event, great time. As has been the case, in the past, I'll also keep an eye out as I'm walking around. I'll obviously be there for my primary job at Fishing Tackle Retailer magazine and all that comes with that at ICAST. But I always have a look out there while I'm walking the show floor, while I'm meeting up with all the great brand representatives that I'm quite familiar with over the years, looking for those surf fishing items, the new stuff, the stuff that is geared for us surfcasters, which, you know, to be completely honest, is rather limited at ICAST, but there's a lot of crossover stuff. That really seems to be where ICAST shines as far as a surfcaster's perspective. I found a lot of things over the years there that, you know, might be something made for offshore fishing, for muskie fishing, for pike fishing, even for bass fishing. But it can apply for us on the surfcasting side of things. Of course, there'll be brands there with surf-specific gear, like I said, and I'll definitely keep an eye out for that. But nonetheless, keep an eye on the social media, especially our stories on Instagram. I try to do it there, drop all the cool stuff that I find, whether it's at the new product showcase, Best to Show, all the different ceremonies and things that go along, as well, of course, the thousands and thousands of square feet of floor space that they have for that show. Obviously, it's a great event, industry only. That's where a lot of new products get a launch, so it's always pretty cool, even if once again in Orlando in the middle of July. But enough about that. That will be next week. Let's get into this week's episode. I was kind of going back and forth what I was going to do this week. Again, I knew Jerry wasn't going to be available. I'm actually pushing this to last minute recording. I'm recording this on Sunday, and it is going to be hitting you in just a few hours come Monday morning. Actually went offshore tuna fishing yesterday, and that's when it hit me. We haven't had a chance yet to do our lessons from the log. So you're going to get lessons from the log solo edition for me for June. It was something we were trying, Jerry and I were just about to get those recordings started for the lessons from the log, you know, the regular series, when he got a little sick here and had to step aside for a few weeks. But nonetheless, it's always interesting both for me to look back at my logbook, see what I can pick out from it, what's going on. And, you know, it's not, as we've done in the past, it's not about, or we've said in the past, excuse me, it's not about bragging and saying, hey, you know, check this out, look at how awesome we did, our logbook is the best, we hammered these fish. No, we try to be really honest with you. If we have a good month, we're gonna tell you within reason, of course. If we have a bad month, a bad couple of outings, things just aren't going right, no doubt we are going to let you know. We're going to sugarcoat it. We're not going to sugarcoat it, excuse me. And what we really want to bring from it, while we termed it lessons from the log, is things that you can learn. Things that I'm learning from looking at these month by month, groupings of fishing expeditions, outings, looking through the logbook, reviewing, comparing it year to year. And hopefully you'll be able to extract something, and maybe it'll get you, the listeners of the Surfcast podcast, also to think about what you're doing, how your season is going, whether it's week to week, month to month, year to year, etc. And hopefully improve as a surfcaster from there, because that's what I'm always looking to do. All right, so I don't think we actually got a May edition in this year. I'll be super brief on that. My May was average to disappointing. I got out a handful of times, found some fish here and there, had a couple of decent fish early on, but it set the stage for June, and really they're both very similar. To a degree, as I was sort of planning it and looking back at the log, a couple outings that I thought were in June were actually May, and vice versa, so they kind of blended together. It was a really consistent window on the negative side to a degree. In June, I got just about a dozen outings, not my best numbers, obviously, but got out nonetheless. The consistent factor has sort of been the theme for the last couple of years for me, for sure. It's really running into a matter of feast or famine, meaning I'd have, an outing where I'd get, and unfortunately these days feast is 7 to 9 fish, let's say, and then the next 2 or 3, same spot, same conditions, etc., same tide stage, I'd be lucky to pull a fish. Now that's something that's just been going on for a while for a variety of reasons I won't really dig into today. And it I guess if there's a negative aside from just the numbers of fish side of it, is that at times for me, I find it difficult to find motivation to get out, to push myself out the door. Reason being, in the past, if I was on a bite, if I was hammering fish, I was like, I got to get back out. Last night I did this number of fish. This was my big fish of the spot. All right, I'm going to go repeat that tonight. Conditions are really similar. I should be, theoretically on the same type of bite, same conditions are going to produce roughly, a 24-hour cycle later, similar. But in the last years, it has not happened. There's been so many instances where I either hammered them one night and then got totally blanked the very next night or the next 2 nights even, and vice versa, where it was like dead city, ghost town, bam, hot night, then nothing. Is it pods of fish coming around? Obviously, not trying to go too far into it, but I feel it's, we don't have quite the density of population, the widespread population of the striped bass we need, not trying to start that argument here today by any means. Just what I'm seeing or fishing for the surf for more than 40 years is the numbers just aren't there. If you've got tons of fish everywhere, then you have more consistent fishing. If you've got little pockets and isolated pods of fish and isolated bites, the fishing just is not as good. It's not as consistent. If you're just fishing off the same school of fish, you're fishing off the same school of fish. If you don't hit them that night when they're on the feed, they might be there the next night, but maybe just the way their feeding cycle goes, they're not on the heavy feed like they were the night before or the 2 nights before. Whereas in the past, if there's just schools on schools on schools, you think you're on the same fish, but potentially what you hit on tonight that was good bite, maybe they took a break or a breather or cycled out and another pod moved in. So you get this idea that you're on the same fish, same size, classes of fish, etc. But in reality, it might not be so. Now I don't have any hard evidence to this, just sort of theories that come to a surfcaster's mind in the middle of the night when they're trying to figure out why or why not they're catching. That's sort of the way that I go with it in my head. So again, I ran into a lot of that this June. I do okay. I'd have, fortunately, again, okay night might have been 5 or 6 fish. And then I'd had 2 nights where I put it into the double digits. And these are not schoolies. They're primarily 15 to about 35 pounds. That's the class of fish that I was on for the month of June. Quality fish nonetheless. No giants, nothing over 40 pounds. No schoolies. Not trying to sound the alarm there by any means, because as I've talked about a lot in the past, I really try to cater my methods to eliminating those small fish. I am not trying to run up numbers. To be honest, if it's less than 15 pounds, I don't care to catch those fish. I'm not trying to do that. There's nothing wrong with it if you want to. That's fine. But I don't feel that I'm learning anything when I'm on those fish. When I'm on those fish that are just haphazardly attacking anything, striking anything you throw at them, yeah, it feels good. It does feel good to catch. I mean, there's been nights where I had a lot of fun catching nothing but those, sub 28-inch, 30-inch fish. And I walked away, content. But I don't feel I really learned much. I'm not learning a whole lot off of fish that are just eager to strike, to hit, to feed. And there's just hundreds of them all around. And they're not smart enough to know any better yet. That's why I like that 15-pound, a high teen. They still got a good piece of that mentality, that stupid, I'm going to strike anything. But they're the smarter ones are starting to show themselves. And there's nights where it can be frustrating. And, then you get into the 20s and 30s and on up. And I just feel they get, I don't know if smarter is the right, the appropriate term for them. But they're just a little more difficult to catch. So, that's what I'm shooting for. So that's what I was getting into this past month. It was really, even regardless of whether I was doing well on a given night, whether I got into a decent bite or I only got 1 or 2 fish, and there was a couple of those nights, it was very specific bite windows. They were windows that were, I wouldn't really describe as random, because they aligned with past scenarios, past occurrences, past notes in my logbook. And not necessarily just for the month of June. They're very consistent patterns, especially at one specific spot that I fished quite a bit. Probably it was my most heavily fished spot in the month of June this year. That spot, since I first discovered it perhaps 15 years ago, has really shown at a spot within the spot a super select window. And it's roughly an hour wide, hour long, that if something's going to happen, it's going to happen in that time frame. Meaning, if I get there and I'm 3 hours outside of that window, I might pick a fish here or there. But even on the nights when there's nothing, it feels like a complete dead zone for like those 2-3 hours leading to that piece of the tide stage, the tide window. I stick it out because if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in that hour window. To the point, from logging my trips, the biggest fish of the night is in a 10 to 15 minute window. And in June, it was within a 5-minute window. It was wild how close to that little tiny spot all of the success and the better success was happening. There's a lot of reasons why that could be. There's a lot of theories. I've talked to some people that know this area and have some ideas on it. And I don't know that they're right. I don't know that they're wrong, but they're interesting. They're the type of theories that we work with when we're out there surf fishing. I bet if you added it up, more striped bass were caught from the surf last year on plastic swimmers than any other plug. Probably even more than bucktails. The reason is simple. For generations, the plastic swimmer has proven to be a versatile, effective, and affordable fish-catching machine.
And that's where the new Hogi OG Swimmer comes in. Unlike most of the other modern swimmers that all look and act alike, the OG Swimmer brings together a traditional design with modern enhancements to offer anglers with a unique and highly effective swimming plug unlike anything else currently on the market. With a unique wobbling action, it moves like an injured baitfish, and it's a large profile, chunky and tubular, and measuring in at 7 inches. Plus, with a downturn line tie, the OG Swimmer stays shallow, making it ideal for surf anglers.
All of this is tied together in an extra hard body that's through-wired and decked out with VMC hooks and a hand-tied bucktail teaser. And just like the Hogi needlefish, you won't find a rear hook on this lure, which is better for the fish, better for your hands, and easier on your wallet. This is all part of the Hook One platform, as well as Hogi's new core philosophy, quality for today, conservation for tomorrow. To find out more about this mission, and to pick up one of these premium OG swimmers, be sure to check out www.hogilures.com. All right, so what am I thinking? That little tiny tide window, the tide. Let's put it a 15-minute stage of the tide that I'm looking at. That I produced the best this past month, and I've done in past years at this particular spot. What I'm looking for to try to define, I'm trying to figure out what clues might lead me to figure out what's producing it. Why is that spot, that window, if there's a body of fish that's going to move in, and especially the largest fish of the tide, why is it doing that? And if you really pay attention, there's subtle keys that I've picked up on in different locations. It might be that just for a short window of time, it might only happen on certain wind conditions, but generally these things that I'm seeing happen or make themselves visible, some sort of a key or clue makes itself visible regardless of the other conditions, aside from, crazy wind and surf that completely washes everything out. But, as long as it's readable water for the most part, I see little clues. I might see a tide rip that will move locations. It might move in or out, up or down based on the speed of the current at that time. I've had little windows in spots where the current will actually change direction for a short time for one reason or another. Like a back eddy will roll through. I've seen indicators on the surface of the water. It might be debris will always push through at a certain stage of the tide. Foam, I've seen that a lot of times at spots that give me these keys. And I'm giving you, indicators from multiple spots, not just this one that produced this past month. I'm trying to show you what I'm looking for. So if I start to get into fish, I try to not just say, okay, it's moon A, tide B, wind C. Those are in there, but I'm also trying to observe as best I can. Is there something else? Was the water height something? Is it always that, it's this higher of a tide or that lower of a tide? And the way I kind of gauge that is I try to, fish off the same rocks consistently. So I'll know if a tide tops out on a higher tide stage and it only gets, I'm standing in it tops out at my thigh, and then on a higher level it tops out at my waist and lower at my knee. I try to kind of keep gauge of where we are in that, because is it that the tide, the water depth is what's pulling the fish? Is it a current? Is it something pulling in from offshore? Perhaps the fish are staging in one location, and then some indicator that I can see coincides with some sort of natural phenomenon that brings the fish in there to feed. Does it present a better feeding opportunity for them? Perhaps it's bringing bait in for some reason or another. It's dislodging fish or bait that they can feed on. There's all these things we don't really know. But if I can find some visual indicators, even in the middle of the night, as to that, it sort of helps me along. It helps me with confidence for sure, because on those slow nights, if I see it happening, I get excited. I have a little more enthusiasm, and I'm putting even more concentration and more purpose to each of my casts. Unfortunately, on the flip side of it, if those indicators are there and nothing happens, it's difficult to continue to push it out and to keep casting. But that's what I'm looking for, and that was certainly a thing this June, where when the indicator would occur, it was signaling a 15-minute window of theoretical potential activity. And it was wild how accurate it was, how often it happened, you could practically just, I could have practically just gone in on that window, walk in, throw for 15 minutes, and we'll go home and call it. It's not very fun. That's too mechanical, so to speak. But realistically, when you look at it, there's a lot of those nights where I'd be done and I'm, driving home 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, all right, I was just out here for 3-4 hours of, from the time I got on my truck to the time I got back, from accessing the water and getting on my spot and moving, etc. Dude, why didn't you just fish that little window? Well, of course, the fish don't pay attention to my logbook. Things do change. Occasionally there's the wild card that pops up, whatever. So you got to do it. You can't just fish those 15-minute windows, but man, it would be nice if that's all you had to worry about. But hey, if you're only getting good 15-minute windows, your season's not going to be all that good because your numbers are going to be pretty darn low. But anyway, so that's what I had for this month. Some decent fish. Like I said, 15 to the tops that I pulled this month was 38 pounds. Nothing crazy, nothing outlandish. Decent fish. Again, still on a no 40-pound streak, unfortunately. I believe I talked about it when we did our wrap up for last season. It was 2024 was the first season in far too long, let's just say, that did not crack the 40-pound mark. And unfortunately, this season's already starting off that way. And honestly, early on, I thought I was going to hit that pretty quick, because one thing I have noticed, the fish have been fat. These are football tanks of fish, to the point where I've weighed a couple on the boga, because I don't weigh every fish. I weigh the, I kind of got a pretty good estimate of fish weights for my logbook. I'll get when I want to see when they hit that 40 mark. And I've had a couple that were in the 30s that they were shorter than I thought, but they were just so fat and so healthy. Popped them up real quick, gave them a look, and they didn't hit it. And that's fine. It's good. I'd rather see solid, healthy fish that are weighing over what they should be, over their weight class, than racers. I mean, there is nothing worse than getting that, I call them the lollipop bass, that just a giant head and a deflated stomach and a skinny little tail, emaciated. Just not good, not healthy fish. So I'll take the fat ones that throw off your guesstimates a bit any day, for sure. It's also, as I've theorized in the past, a low 40-pounder is just a fat 30-pounder. And a low 50 is just a fat 40. So if you're running on fat fish, you got a better chance of, for equal length and proportion, stepping up to that next weight class of fish. So last thing I'm going to touch upon here, something I believe we started last season, was to discuss the top producing lures for the month. Based on how I was finding fish, meaning it was generally shorter bite windows, I am fishing more selective lures in that type of scenario. Meaning if there's a lot of fish around and they could be, they're not specific to like little tiny windows of time, I throw more searching lures. Things like a super strike darter, a needlefish, glide baits, things that I'm covering a lot of water and I'm moving around. I can cover different depths and different locations. I can cast really far. So I'm really covering some ground to find where the fish are, assuming that there's fish in different places. When the fish are coming through in smaller little tide windows, I go with more, I don't want to call them finesse baits, because in my mind, finesse is lighter tackle. From the bass world, the finesse fishing is small, light tackle stuff. But it's the mentality of what they're doing at that side, where they're taking that little bait and putting it on. They're going for the one fish. They're putting it right where they believe it's going to be. I'm going to put this lure in this little tiny window, and if it goes through there and nothing happens, I'm going to reel in, I'm going to put it back again. Go through that spot and continue to beat that spot until I feel there's nothing there, and then I hit the next window. So the two lures that I use to do that, and that produced the best for me this month, were the Joe Bags Tackle Block Island Eel. That's the 13-inch rubber bait, and that would be fished on the half-ounce head. So just like in the freshwater, when you're trying to, a lot of that finesse type stuff, they're putting a little finesse fish or I don't know, a little soft plastic and a little jig head, and they're going right in there. I'm doing the same concept. So I'm putting that bait through a small window. It might be 5 to 10 feet at most. I'm just beating it through different angles, coming down and in, up and in, across, working through on the bottom, working through just overhead, really trying to present as many times as I can to a fish that I believe is there, until I either piss it off enough that it bites or convince it that what I'm putting in front of it is food. And the other bait, that's when I've got a little bit of current moving. On the slower stages of the tide, or a way that I've figured out, which I'll discuss some other time, another bait that I'll use in that scenario, excuse me, is the 12-inch sluggo. And I fish that on the BKK Titan Rider. On the 12-inch sluggo, I'm running the 10-0. No additional weight on it. There's enough weight with that sluggo, and it sinks well enough and it dives down that I can get away with just fishing it as is. Even into a surprising headwind, I can cast that thing as it is without any extra weight, better than a lot of GT eel, Block Island eel, the Hogi jig and eel, stuff like that, because it's more streamlined. It stays together better on the cast, whereas those being so supple, they kind of ripple and catch wind and you lose the casting distance. So the 12-inch sluggo, I fish it, the way I describe it is like a dead eel. What I mean by that is when I used to fish a lot of dead eels, I would cast them out, slower tides to current stages, let it hit the bottom, and I would crawl that thing back. Almost like a freshwater bass guy, or when I used to freshwater bass fish a lot, a rubber worm on a Texas rigged rubber worm. I am just creeping and crawling that thing along the bottom, making it look like some sort of food on its last leg, and an easy meal for the bass. So I do kind of a similar concept with the 12-inch sluggo. I'll cast it way up current, let it come down into the bottom range. You know, as long as I'm within, I'm assuming 3 to 5 feet of the bottom. And I get that, I'm assuming that because when I do just give it extra time to sink, I hit bottom pretty quickly. So I know I'm in that range. And I bring it back slowly. And it's a slow crank, a pop. And I've watched it in the daylight. What it does is that 12-inch sluggo will kind of come along. It'll just sort of coast through the water when you're on the retrieve, 2 to 5 cranks. And then to stop, it'll just glide down slowly, and then I'll pop it, and that'll shoot it off to the side randomly. You know, whatever direction it happens to be angled, I pull it back. And more than 9 times out of 10, 49 out of 50 times, that hit comes right after I yank it, pop it, and it does its glide out and stops, and then starts to descend. They hammer that thing. And all of my biggest fish this month, everything that was, all except for, one of the fish over 30 pounds in June, came on that 12-inch sluggo rigged and fished just like that. I had one on a Joe Baggs Block Island eel. I had a lot of fish in the, a lot of the fish in the 20s were on the jig setup, but the bigger fish in that small tide window, the current was slowing down, which helps to that, caters to that presentation of the weightless 12-inch sluggo. That's what produced it. Hammer hits, fish fighting above their weight class, big, fat, chunky, happy fish. But again, it was 1 or 2. Some nights 1. I'd fish 3 hours and have that one hit in that window, and it was a good fish. And it was, that's what I was going there for. And I made sure there was nothing outside of that window, but that's when they came through. And that's what produced for me. So that's about it. I'm going to wrap it up here. That's how my June went. Not the best, not the worst. Continuing to plug along. July has sort of continued on that point. I'm not going to get into that today. You can wait for the next installment of the lessons from the logbook. And again, we'll be back next week with another installment of the Surfcast Podcast. Again, thanks for joining me on my own today. I'm Toby Lapinski, and hopefully next week we will have Jerry Audet back as well.
This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.